March 9, 2024. Grace Baptist Church, Birmingham, Alabama. A day meant for love, unity, and the sacred promise of forever. The scent of fresh roses filled the air. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting hues of blue and gold onto the marble floor. Friends and family sat in quiet anticipation, their eyes fixed on the altar, where Pastor David Montgomery and Cassandra Wright stood hand in hand. The church was alive with warmth. A gospel choir had just finished their song. The guests, some with tears in their eyes, smiled as the couple exchanged glances filled with nothing but love. The officiant adjusted his microphone. The moment had come. "Do you, David Montgomery, take Cassandra Wright to be your lawfully wedded wife?" David inhaled, steadying himself for the words he was about to say. His bride, radiant in white, squeezed his hands. Then, a deafening crack. The sound of a gunshot shattered the moment. Gasps filled the church. Screams followed. Cassandra's body jerked backward, her white gown blooming red. A second shot. Then a third. David collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest. Guests scrambled from their seats, some rushing toward the altar, others ducking behind pews. The officiant dropped his Bible. The choir fell silent. And standing at the entrance of the church, holding a smoking gun, was Vanessa Carter. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She simply stared at the bodies in front of her, her expression void of emotion. The bride. The groom. Both crumpled at the altar, in the very place where they were supposed to begin their new life together. A moment of silence hung in the air, thick, suffocating. Then, the chaos erupted. A woman's voice pierced through the commotion. "Oh my God, she shot them." 911 calls flooded the lines. Shots fired. Shots fired inside the church. The sound of police sirens grew louder in the distance. Flashing red and blue lights painted the church walls. Officers stormed inside, weapons drawn. Vanessa didn't resist. She dropped the gun onto the marble floor with a metallic clang. The faintest hint of a smile pulled at her lips as she whispered, "Now we're even." The air inside the church still carried the scent of wedding flowers. The vows had been spoken. The rings had been exchanged. But the last words David Montgomery and Cassandra Wright heard on their wedding day weren't words of love. They were gunfire. This is the story of a man who tried to move on. A woman who refused to let go. And a wedding day that ended in bloodshed. Birmingham, Alabama. A city of faith, history, and community. The kind of place where Sunday mornings are sacred, where church doors remain open, and where weddings are celebrated as more than just unions, they're milestones, cherished moments shared with the ones who matter most. On the morning of March 9, 2024, Grace Baptist Church stood as it had for decades, a symbol of faith and unity. Its towering white steeple reached toward the heavens, the sound of hymns often spilling into the quiet streets below. But by the end of that day, the church would no longer be remembered for its sermons or its prayers. Instead, it would become the scene of a crime so shocking that even the most seasoned officers would struggle to forget it. David Montgomery was more than just a pastor. At 39 years old, he was a respected figure in the Birmingham faith community, a man who had built his life around guiding others, offering hope, and leading with conviction. His sermons were passionate, his outreach programs extensive. He mentored young men, counseled struggling families, and spoke often about redemption. Yet, for all his wisdom and guidance, his personal life was far from simple. David had once been deeply involved with Vanessa Carter, a woman he met in his late 20s. Their relationship was turbulent, marked by highs of deep passion and lows of bitter arguments. But from that relationship came one undeniable bond, their son, Elijah Montgomery, now 6 years old. David had tried to make things work with Vanessa for the sake of their child, but love, true, lasting love, was something he found with someone else. Cassandra Wright. She was 32 years old, a social worker with a heart for people, especially troubled youth. Her job had brought her into the lives of those struggling with addiction, homelessness, and abuse, and she dedicated herself to giving them a second chance. She met David through a church outreach program, where he had been working to provide resources for young men leaving the prison system. What started as a professional connection quickly grew into something more. She was drawn to his passion. He admired her strength. By 2023, David and Cassandra were inseparable. Their relationship wasn't just built on romance, it was built on faith, trust, and a shared vision for the future. When David proposed in early 2024, there was no doubt in his mind, Cassandra was the woman he was meant to spend his life with. But there was one person who refused to accept that. Vanessa Carter had a history. At 37 years old, she was no stranger to trouble. A criminal record traced back more than a decade, aggravated assault, destruction of property, a brief stint in prison for attacking a former employer. She had always been intense, her emotions unpredictable, her temper explosive. Her relationship with David had been just as volatile. When they were together, she controlled him, emotionally, psychologically. And even after they parted ways, she never truly let go. Those who knew Vanessa say she had a way of making sure David stayed within her reach. Through their son, she maintained a presence in his life, ensuring he never truly moved on. But when David proposed to Cassandra, something inside Vanessa snapped. Friends recalled a shift in her behavior, erratic phone calls, thinly veiled threats, sudden appearances at David's church. She would later claim in court that she had been pushed aside, disrespected, abandoned. But the truth was simpler, and darker. David had moved on. Vanessa refused to let that happen. And on the day of his wedding, she made sure of it. 6 months before the wedding. David Montgomery had always believed in redemption. He had spent years preaching that no soul was beyond saving. That people, no matter their past, could change. But Vanessa Carter wasn't interested in change. When she learned of David's engagement to Cassandra Wright in the fall of 2023, something inside her twisted into something dark, something obsessive. This wasn't just about losing a relationship. It was about losing control. She wasn't just his past. She was the mother of his son. And in her mind, that gave her a permanent claim to him. Friends later recalled a shift in Vanessa's behavior. She became erratic. Unpredictable. At first, it was just words, snide comments during custody exchanges, cold glares when she saw him with Cassandra. But then came the messages. Texts that left David uneasy. You think you're safe in that church? Think again. Your wedding day will be your funeral. David ignored them. He had dealt with Vanessa's threats before. They had always been empty. Always just anger bleeding into words. Until they weren't. 3 months before the wedding. Vanessa was seen outside David's house. Neighbors noticed her parked down the street in her car, headlights off, sitting motionless for hours. Once, Cassandra came home late from work and caught a glimpse of someone standing near the edge of their driveway, a figure, just beyond the street lamp's glow, watching. By the time she called David to come outside, the person was gone. When Cassandra told him about it, David brushed it off. She just likes making her presence known. Ignore her. But Cassandra couldn't shake the feeling that Vanessa was waiting for something. Watching. 2 weeks before the wedding. David received an envelope in his church office. There was no return address. Inside was a single item, a photograph. A picture of him and Cassandra, smiling at a restaurant, taken from a distance. On the back, written in red ink. If I can't have you, no one will. David still didn't call the police. He told himself it was Vanessa trying to get in his head. But by now, she wasn't just playing mind games. She was making a plan. The wedding day, March 9, 2024. Grace Baptist Church, Birmingham, Alabama. The ceremony was set for 3 p.m. Guests began arriving as early as 2 p.m., filling the church with chatter and laughter. Women in elegant dresses, men in crisp suits. The air carried the scent of roses and fresh lilies, decorations draped along the pews. David stood at the altar, his heart pounding, not from nerves, but from the overwhelming joy of the moment. He had waited for this day. Cassandra was about to become his wife. Neither of them knew that death was sitting in the pews. Witnesses later recalled seeing a woman sitting in the back of the church. Her posture was stiff. She wore a pale-colored veil, her face mostly obscured. No one recognized her. No one noticed how she kept her hands in her lap, fingers wrapped around something hidden beneath her shawl. No one knew she was carrying a gun. As the ceremony began, Vanessa Carter sat there, listening, watching. Her grip tightened around the cold steel of the weapon in her hands. Her breathing slowed. And as the officiant turned to David, asking him to repeat his vows, Vanessa rose to her feet. This wasn't just an objection. This was an execution. 3:45 p.m., the vows begin. The sanctuary of Grace Baptist Church was filled with warmth and light. The golden afternoon sun filtered through the stained glass windows, casting soft hues of blue and red across the marble floor. All eyes were on David Montgomery and Cassandra Wright, standing side by side at the altar, hands intertwined. The officiant, an elder pastor and longtime mentor of David's, smiled as he spoke. "Do you, David Montgomery, take Cassandra Wright to be your lawfully wedded wife?" David took a breath, his lips parting to say the words he had waited so long to speak. But before he could answer, a thunderous bang ripped through the church. For a split second, silence. Then, chaos. Screams filled the air. Guests jerked in their seats, heads snapping toward the back of the church. A woman let out a shriek, clutching her chest in horror. At the entrance of the aisle, Vanessa Carter stood motionless, a gun still raised, the barrel pointed straight ahead. A bride was supposed to wear white. But now, Cassandra's dress was turning red. She staggered backward, her bouquet slipping from her fingers. A single red rose fell onto the marble floor, landing beside the blood pooling at her feet. David's expression was frozen between confusion and horror. And then, another shot. This one hit Cassandra again, sending her collapsing to the ground. Gasps. Cries. A baby wailed somewhere in the back of the church. Before David could move, before he could reach for his bride, Vanessa shifted her aim. Bang! The first bullet tore into David's shoulder. His body jolted back, pain exploding through his chest. He stumbled, catching himself on the altar. His blood smeared across the white cloth covering the communion table. Bang! A second shot. This time, straight to his stomach. David collapsed beside Cassandra, gasping, eyes wide with disbelief. His last sight was of her, her hand outstretched, inches from his own. Just minutes ago, they had been promising each other forever. Now, they were lying side by side in a growing pool of blood. Screams echoed through the church. People tripped over pews, pushing toward the exits. An elderly woman fainted in the front row. A groomsman tried to charge at Vanessa, but she turned the gun on him, stopping him in his tracks. And then, she did something no one expected. She dropped the gun. The metal clattered onto the marble floor, the sound ringing through the now hushed church. Vanessa took a slow step forward. Then another. Her eyes never left David's body. And as she stared down at him, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Now we're even." No rage. No regret. Just a chilling calm. The first 911 call had gone out seconds after the first shot. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air. Birmingham police stormed through the church doors, guns drawn, expecting a hostage situation, expecting a shooter on the run. Instead, they found Vanessa Carter standing in the middle of the aisle, hands at her sides. She didn't resist. She didn't cry. She simply smiled. Officers cuffed her right there, in front of the bodies of the man she once loved and the woman she despised. As she was led out of the church, wedding guests pressed against the walls, their faces pale with horror. Some cried. Others trembled. But Vanessa? She never looked back. The wedding that should have been a celebration of love became a scene of unimaginable horror. 2 lives were taken in an instant. A child was left without parents. A congregation was left shattered. And Vanessa Carter? She showed no remorse. As police escorted her out of Grace Baptist Church, Vanessa Carter held her head high. Reporters swarmed outside, cameras flashing, microphones shoved forward, demanding answers. Vanessa. Why did you do it? She paused, turning her head slightly toward the crowd. And then, in a voice devoid of regret, she simply said, I did what needed to be done. She was taken into custody at Jefferson County Jail, booked on 2 counts of first-degree murder. When investigators questioned her, she didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't cry. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and said, If he had just stayed with me, none of this would have happened. The state of Alabama versus Vanessa Carter became one of the most high-profile murder trials of the year. The prosecution painted a clear picture: this was premeditated murder. Months of threats. Hundreds of messages, warning David that his wedding would never happen. Surveillance footage of Vanessa casing the church weeks before. And the most damning piece of evidence. She had hidden the gun inside a wedding gift box. Inside that box, next to the gun, was a single note written in red ink. Till death do us part. The courtroom fell silent when that was read aloud. Vanessa, sitting at the defense table, smirked. Her attorneys argued she was mentally unstable. They brought in psychologists who testified that Vanessa had suffered from years of abandonment issues and paranoia. They claimed David had led her on, still giving her hope while planning a life with another woman. But the jury didn't buy it. The deliberation lasted less than 4 hours. When the judge asked the jury for their decision, the foreman didn't hesitate. Guilty. On both counts. Vanessa didn't flinch. Even as the judge gave her a death sentence, she simply smiled. David Montgomery's 6-year-old son became an orphan overnight. He would never see his father again. Never feel his mother's arms. The congregation of Grace Baptist Church struggled to heal. The bloodstains were scrubbed from the marble floors. The bullet holes patched in the church walls. But the scars left behind, those would never fade. A love meant to last forever, ended in blood. A wedding is supposed to be a beginning, not an ending. 2 people stood before their family, their friends, and their faith, promising forever. Instead, they were given seconds. This was a crime fueled by obsession, jealousy, and a refusal to let go. But could it have been prevented? Were the warnings ignored? Did the justice system fail to protect David and Cassandra? And most importantly, should Vanessa Carter have received the death penalty? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you found this case as chilling as I did, don't forget to subscribe for more true crime deep dives. Hit the like button if you believe their story deserves to be told. And share this video with someone who needs to hear the truth. Because in the end, every crime has a final truth.